Hey, Marco and others. If you're just joining us from the other room, go ahead and get settled. We're getting our live stream up and running, and we will be ready shortly.
Alex,
Good.
just a real quick question. Um, will I be judging this round?
We got you. I didn't hear from you, so I put Marco in.
Oh, okay.
You're welcome to stick with us.
I will. I'll watch.
Okay, great. Thanks. See you shortly. Just running a few pre-checks before we get started here. Judges, are you all in the room? I have Dave, Jeff, and Marco.
Yep, I'm here.
Fabulous dream team. And Yale University, are you all here?
We have a couple people in the bathroom right now, so we might be 1 minute, but we're almost ready to go.
Sure thing. Yale, just give me a thumbs up when you're ready. I'll be looking at you, Lionel.
Great, thank you.
Sure. William and Mary, are you here in the room? I will take that as a no. We'll give them just a couple moments. And just a quick reminder, since I know we have a couple of folks still with us from the last match, if you're just going to be joining us as an observer, please do rename yourself as a spectator, just so I am sure not to send you into a breakout room for a conferral, which if you're an observer, you will not need.
We are good to go whenever everybody else is.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to track down William and Mary here. And I believe that's them now. Hello, William and Mary.
Hello.
Or should I say hello, Lydia, Shaley, and Bernardo from the College of William and Mary. Your names are not, in fact, William and Mary. All right. Are we all ready to go, students? Fabulous. Well, everybody take a deep breath. Give yourself a brief pat on the back for making it through a long and arduous day. And we have come now to the end. All right. Well, welcome, if we're all ready, to the championship round of the 2025 IEBOnline Regional Ethics Bowl. This match will be between Yale University and the College of William and Mary. I'd like to thank our judges for volunteering their time, and even though they've been here all day, I'd ask them to introduce themselves just one more time. Marco, would you begin, please?
Hi, everyone. I'm Marko Mavrovic, former Ethics Bowl competitor, coach, organizer, volunteer, and a colleague of Alex and Jeff and Dave. So very happy to be with you here, and congratulations on getting this far.
Dave?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. David Holliday. I'm the visiting ethics scholar here at the Janet Prindle Institute for Ethics, and I teach philosophy at DePaul. Congrats on making it to the championship round, both teams. I'm very excited to hear you Ethics Bowl one more time today.
Excellent. And Jeff?
Hi there, I'm Jeff Dunn. I'm the director of the Prindle Institute for Ethics at DePaul University and an associate professor of philosophy here at DePaul as well. And just add my congratulations to both teams on what's been a really great day of competition.
And I'm Alex Richardson, rounding out almost our entire staff in the room. I'm an associate director at the Prindle Institute, and with this cast of characters, you are as close as you possibly can get by being on the other end of a computer to being physically in the Prindle Institute. So we're glad to have you with us. If there are no other questions or concerns, we'll begin the match. Teams, from this point on and for the last time today, there will be no substitutions, no consulting with anyone other than your teammates, and no reviewing outside materials. As a reminder, if you're a coach or a spectator, please do remember that communicating with either team, verbally or otherwise, is not allowed. Please keep your microphones muted throughout the competition, of course, so that our students can concentrate on the work before them. I will now flip a coin to determine the presenting order. There's no left and right on my Zoom screen, so Yale shows up on my screen like higher on the page. So Yale, would you please call the coin toss?
We would like to call heads, please.
Okay, flipping it now. It is tails. So William and Mary, you'll be tasked with selecting whether to play defense or offense. Would you like to present first or comment first?
Could we present second, please?
You may. So judges, let the record and your score sheet reflect that Yale University will be team A and the College of William and Mary will be team B. Are we all ready to go? Fabulous. Let us commence. For the first half of our match, the case will be number 8, and now you care. The question we'll be focusing on, which I'm dropping in the chat now, is the following. Can an artwork that intentionally causes harm ever be a morally permissible means of advancing compassion or moral awareness? Once more, can an artwork that intentionally causes harm ever be a morally permissible means of advancing compassion or moral awareness? I'm now going to open up the breakout rooms. You'll have up to 2 minutes to confer before beginning the presentation, and that time begins now. Welcome back, all. I hope your conferral was productive. Team A, Yale, you will now have up to 10 minutes to make your presentation. As always, anyone can speak one at a time, and as a courtesy, I'll give you reminders when there are 3 minutes and 1 minute remaining. You'll also see a timer right about here. I'll begin when you begin. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much to the judges, the moderators, and the opposing team for agreeing to participate in this meaningful discussion with us today. We've really enjoyed discussing this case, and we can't wait to hear your commentary on it. So we decided to approach this question through a deontological framework, which is based in the categorical imperative. And one of the three axioms of the categorical imperative is this idea that we cannot use other rational agents as means to an end. But then the question at hand is, who is in consideration as like a rational agent? So in answers our thesis towards the specific question of whether or not an artwork that intentionally causes harm can ever be morally permissible as a means of advancing compassion or moral awareness, we decree that no, artwork can never cause harm to any rational agents. We hold a perfect duty towards other humans that hold full moral status. In terms of animals, on the other hand, who hold an intermediate status, it comes into conjunction on whether or not that, since we hold an imperfect duty towards animals, it becomes in conjunction to whether or not our imperfect duty comes in contrast with our perfect duties, the perfect duty not to steal, not to murder other rational agents, etc. So we're going to structure this case under three main arguments. First, we really have to flesh out the understanding of how we distinguish between animals and human beings, since that is one potential way that artwork could be utilized to cause harm to a specific group of people, in which we are going to distinguish between the two and then define what it means for something to hold an intermediate moral status. And then we want to say, okay, then what is the way that we might be able to protect animals, protect humans, spread awareness outside of means that might cause harm? And yeah, I'm going to pass it on to my teammates to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. In this case, especially because so much of art that we're worried might cause harm does relate to harming animals, we do really have to break down what our duties to humans look like, what our duties to animals look like if we have them at all. So we do want to first, have this framework that humans are fundamentally different from animals, giving us a perfect duty to each other, but only imperfect ones to animals. So first, what makes humans, any more worthy than animals? We think that moral status comes at the junction of several different capabilities, most of which humans differ very significantly from animals. So one is cognitive capacity. Studies from very recent studies too have shown that humans have a very, very distinctive ability to synthesize different parts of our brains when it comes to decision making. There's emotional depth, and there's also the capacity to make normative judgments that go beyond biological instincts. When normative judgments, as in when we take an action, we don't just think, do I want to do this, but should I want to do this? Does this action align with the kind of person I want to be? And these are considerations that give us like practical identities. It gives us conceptions of ourselves that we aspire to be, and it makes us moral agents. So that is where that difference comes from, and why we have a perfect duty to humans, but not necessarily to animals. And I'll move it along to my teammate.
It's now me, I believe. So yes, I want to sort of expand on this point, and it's really the relevance of animals becomes clear because there are a lot of things that we can harm, right? Like there are humans and there are other experiencers, and animals are kind of our stand-in for this class of other experiencers, where we don't have this like immediate sort of absolute answer that no, we can't harm these people as a means to furthering like some ends of an artwork. But with animals, it gets a little fuzzy. I'm going to argue that even though there is this fuzziness with animals, it's incredibly rare that we would ever sort of see this fuzziness lead toward a justification for the harm of animals. So in particular, this case we're discussing, we're talking about violating some like imperfect moral duty, sort of not to harm animals. We have this imperfect duty not to harm animals, both because there's like this sort of intermediate moral status that animals have, where like we care about them a little bit, right? Like they have some experience, and it seems right to care about that experience. And they also have an instrumental, an indirect moral status, where what we do to animals is reflective of how we treat other humans, right? If you stab a pig and it squeals, like all of a sudden, oh, it's kind of like you're stabbing a human. That's pretty awful, right? These things are like humans in a lot of ways that are super important. And so what we say is this is absolutely categorically not an option when we're talking about duties, to some grander duty to sort of save animals. When we're talking about a grander duty to save humans, okay, maybe it starts to come into play. But we're talking as Kantians here. We don't like messing with these consequentialist scenarios. We don't like the idea that you should be able to torture a bunch of pigs for the tiny little off chance that somebody interprets your artwork in a way that helps some humans, serve their perfect moral duties. And so, in fact, we should have like these very, very strong strong intuitions that say, no, we're not going to harm people in the name of artwork. I'll pass it on.
And
with that, I'll kind of just move into the third argument that we're going to focus on, and specifically looking at Kantian's idea of a perfect duty to humans, and then moving on to use that perfect duty to inform how we think about other agents and other beings. So firstly, we know that Kant says that we have a perfect duty towards other people, other rational beings. And so whenever we have this perfect duty, we can extend this idea of not harming people to how we treat other rational agents. For examples, like the pig argument in the case, or other other rational agents and things, or irrational agents as well. So with that, specifically looking at if it is okay to, if it's morally permissible to harm rational agents, if it's morally permissible to harm agents in general, we first have to look at, okay, do we have an imperfect duty towards these rational agents? And yes, we do have an imperfect duty, because we have a perfect duty towards humans, and how we treat humans informs how we'll treat other rational or irrational agents. So when we're looking specifically at art and performance art, or trying to spread some kind of compassion or moral awareness, we have to first regard the fact that we cannot harm people or harm other agents, because we do not harm humans, and how we treat humans informs how we treat other agents. And with that, I'll pass it off to my teammate to talk about some counter arguments.
Wonderful. So thank you to my teammates for laying out a wonderful conception of our duties and our imperfect duties, and how it's never permissible to violate these duties, be they to humans, be they to animals, or whatever, in terms of trying to make an artistic expression. We think, though, let's think about this in terms of a common counterargument, which is this utilitarian one, which it would lead to more, respective duties, whether it be animals or humans, in the long term in terms of outcomes. We think, though, that specifically rendered in the case question regarding art, that even if we accept for a moment utilitarian grounds, that the outcomes are not so clear. We think that art is a very unique medium for which these moral actions happen. We find that art is infinitely interpretable. If some performance art where someone is harmed for the purpose of making a message, take a climate protest, for example, we'd find that at once this could make the protest better and it gains more reception, or on the other hand, it could condemn the protest to being seen as radical or extremist and actually hurt the notion or the cause that it's advocating for. In this way, art is infinitely interpretable, so that the consequences and the utility of it are entirely unpredictable, which is a secondary notion, which is why even if we did accept these utilitarian grounds, we could never justify it. But more importantly, when we analyze it through the proper deontological grounds, we find that using anything, any rational actor or thing that we have a duty towards as a means is always wrong. And so in that case, we can feel very comfortable that in the case of art, as the question gives us, or even not in cases of art, that this commodification and using people and rational actors in this way is always wrong. But I'll move it to Will to discuss more counter arguments.
Thank you so much, Lionel. And another point that we wanted to discuss are, what about other forms of artwork which potentially involve harming an agent of potential value? And to that end, we thought about agents such as video game characters and babies and disabled people. In essence, if someone is incapable of a decision that goes against their biological instinct, then they are not, quote unquote, strictly moral agents. However, we also must recognize that how we consider agents all exist on a spectrum. And that is not to say that they are not deserving of any of our consideration. For example, babies and disabled people, they have potential to develop capacity, and we recognize that to some extent. We don't create art, for example, this is absurd, but blending babies to address the problem of overpopulation. That's sort of a slippery slope to genocide, and I'm very uncomfortable saying that. And then with video game characters, this is really interesting, but I would say that we also have an imperfect duty to the characters in the sense that it might elicit violence tendencies out of people. And with that, I will pass it on to my team.
Yeah, so just to summarize, we've reached the consensus that art, even in the name of a positive consequence, cannot be used in order to justify a violation of the categorical imperative. So no, artwork that intentionally causes harm is impermissible, especially when it comes to terms with our imperfect duties towards animals or our perfect duties towards other humans. Now, this case might get more conflicted when our perfect duties come into conflict with each other, or sorry, imperfect duties come into conflict with our perfect duties, in which we should always follow our perfect duties. However, in this specific case, because artwork is so intense based, and because we cannot predict the outcome of artwork because it is so invariable and we cannot understand how someone might interpret a piece or how different people might, therefore we chose deontology. Thank you so much. We can't wait to hear what you guys think.
Thank you very much, Yale. Judges, please mark your scores for Team A's presentation. While you're doing so, Team B and Team A, I suppose, you'll now have a couple minutes to confer before the commentary period. Both teams can take notes and communicate in their breakout rooms while conferring, and that time will begin now. Welcome back, everyone. Team B, William and Mary, you'll now have up to 5 minutes to comment on Yale's presentation. As before and always, any member can speak one at a time, and as before, I will indicate in the chat when you have 1 minute remaining. You can begin.
Thank you so much, Alex. So we wanted to start by thanking Yale for their thought-provoking and engaging discussion. So in our commentary, first Shioli will bring up some points about sort of your distinctions between different creatures, such as humans and animals. Then I'll return more sort of towards the frameworky aspects of the case, so more focusing on the consequences and the deontological rights you guys discussed in this case, before Lydia, Shioli, and I will give further various assorted commentary.
Yeah, we really enjoyed your case, and in principle agree with many of the things you said. We just have a few comments, starting with this one. You guys seem to grant like a categorical sort of precedence to human beings on the grounds of what you guys say is cognitive capacity and emotional depth. We just think that something like sentience, which might be like a better determinant factor for something like this kind of precedence. I know you guys briefly touched on this sorts of thing, but just imagine a human being who is devoid of like cognitive capacity or like emotional depth, all of these things because of like some developmental or neurological disability. It would be strange to say that people who lack these factors that you guys say are so important would have the same weight. And while we agree that human beings should be given utmost importance in this way and precedence, we disagree about your reasons why.
Yeah, and just to continue on with that, thank you, Shioli. It seems like rationality gives us the ability to become agents, but just because animals aren't necessarily rational agents in the same way we are, doesn't mean that they can't suffer the consequences of the actions of agents because they have that sentience. And so we wanted to sort of distinguish that. So I think something then that we'll move on towards then is sort of the framing of your case, right? And so it seems that in your case, when you're saying that intentionally causing harm is never a morally permissible means of advancing compassion or moral awareness for rational agents, it seems that a counter argument you guys could have considered is, say I flick Shioli on the shoulder, right? And it causes her extremely mild harm. And for whatever reason, this would make every human 25% more compassionate. By your framework, this would not be morally permissible. And so I love a deontological framework. I think it's very consistent and I appreciate it. But we think that could have been a good opposing viewpoint to sort of consider in the case. And maybe a more realistic one would be, you couldn't kick a pig, even if it would make a point to a crowd of 200 people that were about to eat pig-based products, that maybe that wasn't so ethical. And so continuing on towards the consequences of our treatment of animals, marginal reductions in factory farming are huge. 50 pigs were killed in the last minute of our discussion by factory farming. And so the benefits of torturing even 1 or 2 pigs are just immensely gigantic. And so one thing we really thought was interesting about your case is that you seem to be implying that most of us should be vegan, because if we don't eat, animal products, we'll marginally reduce the amount of factory farming animal torture. And therefore not eating meat, for lunch and dinner on one day might save 1 pig in the future from torture. Given that you said because of our, their imperfect duties to them, would you guys be advocating for veganism sort of as an implication of your case? And then one last thing we'd like to bring up is potentially considering a framework of pluralism. The case doesn't directly reference animals. It talks about artwork intentionally causing harm. And it seems like there could be a wide range of artworks that cause harm towards humans that are still poignant and really advance moral compassion. And maybe a pluralistic framework allows us to still frame things in terms of rights while still acknowledging that certain violations of rights could be so beneficial that we can still do so.
Yeah, adding on to what Bernardo said, maybe a framework of pluralism would be more beneficial to your guys' case, because you guys have already kind of implicitly acknowledged the moral complexity of this. You talk about art itself as something that's so difficult to interpret. Consequences can't be interpreted, and intentionality, how can we find intention in art? So yeah, we think that maybe a better application of pluralism seems good here.
Yeah, and thank you, Shioli. So one more thing we'd like to, consider pointing back to the question in the case is, well, the question refers to intentionally causing harm. Do you think that artwork that foresees but does not cause harm is a morally permissible means of advancing compassion or moral awareness? Maybe your exhibition will really help moral compassion when it comes to animals, but you foresee that it'll harm some humans or some pigs, even though you don't directly intend to with the case.
And would it matter how strongly you foresee this harm? Would it matter that you know that it's for certain or not for certain? We're interested in these questions, and we really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
And the Oscar goes to the Zoom timer for the most dramatic noise in history. Judges, please record your scores for Team B's commentary. Team A and also Team B, you will now have up to 2 minutes to confer before beginning your response. Either team can talk or take notes in your breakout rooms, and that time will begin now. Welcome back, everyone. Team A
To respond to
commentary. Any member of the team can speak as always, and I will indicate as before in the chat when you have 1 minute remaining. I'll begin when you do.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry. Thank you so much. So we really appreciated your commentary and we had a very interesting discussion about it. We wanted to jump right in with this idea of how we distinguish between humans and animals when there's edge cases that exist for humans as well, and whether or not they experience full rational capacity. For example, babies or disabled people, as you brought up. We wanted to clarify that we're not assigning full moral status to all human beings, but instead to beings that meet all the criteria listed below. As we mentioned before, cognitive capacity, ability to take actions that go against their biological instincts, ability to verbalize their moral agency. But moral status is a spectrum. There are beings that exist with intermediate moral status. In the same regard, there's a disabled person that who might not be able to verbalize their moral status to you because they're brain dead, etc., and they fall alongside the spectrum. Similarly with animals who maybe in some cases can't take actions that go against their biological instincts. You know, for them, sometimes their beliefs are their perception and their desires are their will. But in that case, they still hold some level of moral relevance because our treatment of them is reflective of our treatment of other human beings in the process. I'm going to kick it off to one of my teammates to further clarify. Thank you.
Yes, I think that was a brilliant explanation. Priya, I think we definitely agree that people who, for whatever reason, don't meet, these criteria, we still have an imperfect duty to them as representations of humans, even if it's not perfect. We also want to clarify why we bring up animals and why we make them so central to this case. It's because in the context of harm caused, harm used to further a message in art, we rarely see that in the context of humans the same way. So, for example, I think almost everyone would condemn, kidnapping a person off the street and kicking them to death, right, to make an artistic statement. But we wouldn't necessarily say that for harm caused to pigs, maybe, or at least like other people might not say that. So that's why, just to clarify why we focus so heavily on that, we think there are fundamental rights. We would definitely say condemn them for humans, and then we'd also extend that more controversially to animals as well.
And I get to talk about something I'm really excited to talk about. I'm really glad that you brought up pluralism because I am not a diehard Kantian, but I still agree with a lot of what we're saying in this case. So I come at this, I mean, in parts as a utilitarian, in parts as a natural rights kind of guy. And all of these theories in many ways converge on animals having some sort of moral status. So a utilitarian might come along and say the distinction between a human rational agent's moral status and an animal's moral status, it's instrumental, right? The sapience that a human has means that we should care about, affecting humans' actions in ways that we don't necessarily, have the privilege of affecting animals' actions in exactly the same way. So like maybe that's where the distinction comes from. Or a rights-based guy will come up and make a very similar argument to what the Kantians are saying. But the rights-based guy will still sort of advocate for the animals having some rights, right? Like, Bentham said, oh, it's not can they think, but can they suffer? Right? It's the harm, it's the suffering that matters. And I'm super glad that we get to talk about the pluralism because it also relates to the question, are we vegans? Do we think that veganism is good? And the answer is yes, kind of. And I'm going to get a little bit wonky here. The Kantian perspective on this is to say, like, yes, we have these imperfect moral duties to save animals from factory farming. That's great. We also do have some perfect duty to sort of like self-sustaining. And there's like science that shows that the B12 that we get from animal products is actually really hard to replicate in other parts of our diet. And so maybe we should be what we call like reducitarians. And you can sort of do utilitarians come along and they do calculations and they say, oh, it seems like chicken and farmed fish suffering is somehow astronomically higher than cow or pig suffering or the suffering involved in the production of dairy. And so maybe we should be okay with getting B12 from dairy and meat products, but try to reduce chicken. And Kantian is going to come along and say very much the same thing. So there's a lot of nice like synergy that arises here. Okay, I'll pass it on. I'm done.
I do think where that synergy kind of diverges, though, is on this wonderful example that you bring up about, from our perspective, it's very clear to say that, art that intentionally harms it's reductive. It uses people as a mere means. It's very bad. I think you bring up this fantastic example of art that is not in a moment using anything as a mere means, and yet can foresee that as perhaps an effect of the action. Here, I think we would employ probably the doctrine of double effect in order to sort of work through this problem and say that in that moment that art is moral, and so that you're not intending the foresawn harm, but rather for intending the artwork itself. And so in that way, it is still moral under our circumstance, even if it can foresee that. But just to touch on the example you gave, let's go over to
Yeah, I would like to touch on this example of flicking to cause like so much compassion in humans. And to that, we would first say that under a Kantian framework, even trivial intentional harm violates the maxim that we should not use others as a means to an end. And second, you talk about how we want to address that art's effects are very indeterminate, and therefore we cannot like actually quantify compassion. So it's very speculative, and we would love to hear what more you have to say about that. Thank you so much.
Your points were amazing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Judges, please note your score for Team A's response and just flash me a thumbs up when you're ready to proceed. That's 3 of 3. Thank you very much. We'll now have a 10-minute Q&A session for the judges and Team A. Judges, you of course can ask your questions in the order you see fit. Do you need time to confer, or are you ready to go? Silly question. You guys were born ready. All right. Well, I'll start when you start, and I'll let you know when there are 2 minutes remaining in the Q&A. You can begin.
All right. Can I go first, colleagues? Thank you. So, thanks. It's been an interesting discussion. I do think, Yale, you've been quite quick to pass over the question of what harm means. You're almost taking it as definitionally moral injury, i.e., the violation of some sort of, duty, which I think that's one sense that harm has, but also has a broader sense of just, injury, loss. So there's reputational harms, there's harm to property as well as harm to persons. I want to ask you about a particular case that is tricky from a Kantian perspective, self-harm. So what if an artist subjects themselves to injury, fear, degradation, isolation, something like that, in order to make this sort of moral point, to raise moral awareness for a cause? There'll be no violation of their consent or rational autonomy in that because they're volunteering to do it. So it'll be like a case of sacrificing yourself for a cause you believe in. Is that counts as harm, sorry, but it doesn't seem to me to sort of violate rational autonomy in the way. So is that just the sort of one outlying case, or do we also need to make space for harm to property, harm to reputation, these other sort of smaller forms of harm? Thanks.
So I think this is a wonderful question. Thank you. I think this self-harm example is wonderful. You have so many pertinent examples from history of maybe like the monks who set themselves on fire to protest Vietnam. That comes to mind. And so I think this is a really pertinent question. I think we would still probably say that this harm is not justified insofar as it's still a human using themselves as a mere means. It's still instrumentalizing. It still sort of degrades your human dignity. I think that's clear. I think the interesting question that your question brings out is, is that instrumentalization okay if you yourself consent to it? If you do it yourself versus if someone else does it to you? I think to this, I would probably draw a notion to rights that are sort of unconscionable to sign away in contracts, in contract settings. I think the like rights like to bodily autonomy, for example, or like you can't sell yourself into slavery, for example. I think these examples become sort of pertinent to me in that we would understand this and you instrumentalizing yourself as sort of an unconscionable formulation of Kant's idea of using people as a mere means. You yourself are still a person. And so in that way, I think we would need to hold these laws consistently, even if you wanted to give up that duty to yourself.
Yeah, I definitely concur. And I think that we hold a perfect duty to our own self-survival. But I think that there's this important question of intention as well, right? Like as an artist myself, I know there's often times where I might be going in to write a piece of writing or paint an art piece. And I know that I might be recounting some traumatic memory, and that might be inflicting some form of harm on myself as well. However, the intention here is not to harm myself, but instead to create a piece of artwork, which I know will have a positive impact in the future on myself, have a positive impact through my process of creation as well. So it's really about balancing that intention and understanding whether or not, less so the consequence of the artwork will be positive, but more so the process of creation will be or not.
Okay, thank you. I was struck when reading this case that the installations were considered art. And I think the artwork itself might be something that's underexplored in your initial presentation. So what for your team constitutes art, and what distinguishes good art from bad art? Is it simply aesthetic judgment or opinion, or is there something more going on here?
Okay, I'm going to jump into the second part of that question directly. So I think it's a very important question. Is there any objectivity that exists within art? You know, is art purely a subjective being? Like, how could we define objectivity in art? Purely based on the impact that it has on people? But if that's how we're defining it, then like impact, is it positive? Is it negative? How do we create these levels of distinguishment? Also, because the impact on a majority is such a volatile concept. And so I think that the answer at hand is that good art is a purely subjective sense. I think maybe we can distinguish between the terms good and great. Great art might be something that has a large influence from a more consequentialist standpoint. We can say that the Communist Manifesto, or like something that something that had a very large impact, but maybe didn't help the most people, is not necessarily in the category, it is in the category of great art, but for me individually, not in the category of good art. Good art is something that has an individual impact on me. Good art is something that I subjectively can look at and feel something extremely different by learning about the experience of another person through their eyes, because that is the purpose of artwork, right? What is art? Art is a process of seeing through another lens. Art is an ability to take on this magical experience that we've been given to immerse ourselves in this life, which is so random and lucky that we are here today, and to see it from the eyes of another. That is, I think, its sole purpose. I'll let anyone else add on if they desire.
I'll add just very briefly, like all of the fuzziness that we're pointing to here, and the subjectivity and the confusion about like what are these aesthetics that we're talking about. This is the motivation for sort of rejecting the utilitarian claim that maybe like this art could eventually lead to a grand social good. We're just like we're in the land of unknown unknowns, right? I mean, art is really confusing.
So just to quickly follow up, it seems like you're suggesting that there could be a case in which there's subjectively, aesthetically good art that is morally objectionable. Is that what I'm understanding?
I would say yes. Sorry, I would say yes. I think that's a possibility. I think that what is good subjectively is solely dependent on like one's pleasure and pain, maybe like from a utilitarian standpoint, the consequences that it derives on the individual, which is based in interpretation. But because we can't predict those interpretations, what we decide as moral or not is determined by the intent of the artist as opposed to the reactions by the ones perceiving the art.
Thank you.
I might even suggest that there's a distinction between the aesthetic good and the moral good, but I mean, hard to say.
So I'm going to follow up here in a way that I hope makes sense. And I think about especially what RA you said in response before about like once we enter the world of art, it's like everything's unknown. We can never predict anything. So I want to stand up for the utilitarian here a little bit because yeah, some things are unpredictable. But some things aren't, and you might think that in the category of art, in some cases, art gives the artist the chance to further clarify their intentions and further clarify what the point of the thing is. In fact, that's what's going on in the case. The artist explicitly is able to say, "Here's why I'm doing this installation. It's to draw attention to this thing." And so, in cases like, I think this is kind of harkening back to the flick example, kind of like in certain cases, we maybe do know that there's going to be a good consequence. And so I'm not totally satisfied with the idea like, well, the world's confusing. We're never gonna know what the consequences are. So let's just throw utilitarian considerations out here. That doesn't quite move me. And just the last thing I'll say is that sometimes we also morally evaluate backwards looking. We're not simply asking what to predict, but we know what happened. And we can say, was that a good thing? And in so that case, I don't think the predictability thing works. So what do you say to that utilitarian challenge?
I'll meet it on utilitarian grounds if I can. The one thing is, you can point to maybe like Extinction Rebellion, they go off and throw, soup on the Mona Lisa, or whatever. Yeah. And it's not necessarily that like the message is unclear. The message is very clear. We are, against climate change, but the reaction is, totally to the opposite of what they want, right? And people are totally negatively polarized against them. So that's like the twist that we're talking about, where people's perceptions can, like, they just end up being really hard to get right. PETA goes out and does like crazy animal animal advocacy, and people hate PETA, and people start to like hate animal advocacy, and it's just so fuzzy. On the point of sort of like retrospective moral judgments. My utilitarian view on this is those are relevant to sort of how we think about future actions. And so I kind of have to put myself in the shoes of this person and think if I was doing a probability calculation then, what would I have thought? And I can't cheat with this forward knowledge because then I'll maybe start assuming that I have this forward knowledge in other cases. So like maybe I can sort of in some abstract sense look back and say, yes, that was a good action that led to a good thing, but I don't want to say that out loud. I don't want to say that out loud. I want to look back and say, wow, that was a crazy action with totally unpredictable consequences. And I don't think we should do things like that in the future.
I just wanted to add that I think the great irony of this case is that, as you pointed out, this artist in making this installation had this statement of intention. It was very clear what was trying to happen. And yet here we are at 7 o'clock on a Saturday discussing whether or not his intentions were justified, whether or not the consequences were justified. So even in these cases, it doesn't seem all too clear to me. But I think that's a wonderful question, and I think all of the questions and considerations so far have been fantastic. So thanks everyone for participating in this conversation so vivaciously. We really appreciate it.
It's not 7 p.m. yet. We're making good time. Judges, thank you, everyone. Please.
Over here.
Yeah. Well, it's not. I'm in the same time zone as you are. It's not 7 p.m. yet. Thanks. I'm just messing with you. Judges, please score Team A's responses to your questions and flash me a thumbs up when you're ready to proceed. All right, that's all three. Take a deep breath because we are now ready to begin the second half. The case for this half will be number 2, ashes to ashes, dust to soil. The question that we'll focus on, which I'm putting in the chat now, is the following. Do new burial practices that turn human remains into soil express proper moral respect for persons, or do they risk reducing human life to mere material? Once more, do new burial practices that turn human remains into soil express proper moral respect for persons, or do they risk reducing human life to mere material? Team B, you'll now have up to 2 minutes to confer before beginning your presentation. As before, both teams can take notes and communicate in their breakouts. Judges, when you go to breakouts, you're more than welcome to start planning your Q&A, but please don't discuss your scoring. Those breakouts will begin now. All right, company, welcome back. Team B, William and Mary, will now have up to 10 minutes to make its presentation. As before, anyone can speak one at a time, and I'll give you reminders in the chat when there are 3 minutes and 1 minute remaining. I'll start when you start, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex. So first off, we just wanted to thank Yale for this great discussion so far, the judges and the moderator for being here today. Thank you all. And so to start our presentation, the question for case 2 here is, do new burial practices that turn human remains into soil express proper moral respect for persons, or do they risk reducing human life to mere material? So we think that, to answer the question as a two-parter, that the new burial practices that turn human remains into soil do not risk reducing human life to mere material, for reasons we'll explain. However, we don't think that this means it's necessarily proper moral respect to bury everyone, to turn their human remains into soil. And so we'll explain why that is. Lydia will explain our pluralist framework in this case and talk about the duties of fidelity and non-maleficence and justice. Then Shioli will discuss these new burial practices and talk about some applications of Lydia's framework to the case. And then finally, I'll discuss sort of these burial practices and what respect for people who are going to be dead actually means before Lydia discusses some alternative frameworks.
Yes, thank you so much, Bernardo. So to come to our solution to this question, we used a framework of pluralism, which essentially has 7 prima facie duties that none of them have a particular hierarchy over the other. And instead, when we see them in a particular case, we weigh them holistically with each other to come to an outcome. So the duties that we see most relevant in this case is first non-maleficence, which is basically the duty to not cause any harm. And so as Bernardo was saying, there's a lot of nuance, especially because the deceased are kind of a main stakeholder in this case, which seems a bit odd to say. And then this ties into fidelity, which is making sure that we keep our promises. And especially for people who are currently stating their wishes with what they would like to be done with their body after they're dead, we need to make sure that we keep their promises, assuming that this is, a respectful and reasonable kind of situation with that. And then, so again, to talk more about the stakeholders in this case, we believe that in addition to those who might be willing to use these new burial practices, or they previously stated before their passing that they wished to be turned into soil, we have those. And then we also have like certain companies that are going to be kind of bringing this into a more broad sphere in the future and making this more common throughout. And so then to talk more about the central tension of this case, which is again, balancing kind of respect with kind of treating our earth and our society as a whole, then Shioli will talk more about that and more about our solution. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lydia. So we talked about how fidelity within our framework, what that really means in our case is to honor the promises that we make to dead people, which we mentioned was one of our stakeholders. And if a person during their life explicitly wishes to be buried in a specific way in order to like honor religious practices, religious tradition in some way, then we think that there's an obligation to honor that person's promise, I suppose. We also think, like within our central tension, we were weighing that against the idea of non-maleficence. Like perhaps this could constitute like bad outcomes for somebody else or living or whatever, or for the family of some person who is like will die eventually, who's also like expressed their wish to die in a specific way, and for their like remains to be disposed of in a certain way. And also, generally speaking, we have this duty of beneficence to do good where we can all the time. And so I think the main point within this case, I guess, hits at this idea of whether those who are deceased actually do have rights. Like, is it weighable within our larger framework to honor the wishes of dead people? And Bernardo is going to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you, Shioli. So obviously we understand that this is an extremely complicated and difficult topic, and not one we can really do justice within our time of presentation. But we wanted to point out two things. That number one, it seems to be violating the duty of fidelity to disrespect the wishes of dead people. So we think that in that one way, even if it's not a direct harm, disrespecting the wishes of the dead to be buried how they are is, wrong in that sense. And then we think that there's another consideration where we think that it would be, sort of just and fair to respect people's wishes about an issue so important as death, given that that's how we would want to be treated as well. And so given that those two factors exist under our pluralistic framework, we think that the dead do have some type of value. So using all that, we can turn back directly to the question: do new burial practices that turn human remains into soil risk reducing human life to mere material? We think that this is not necessarily the case. And again, because people have the right, to have their wishes followed, we think that someone who would want to be buried like this certainly is not reducing themselves into mere material. On top of that, we wanted to get into the second real major aspect of the case, which is the environmental impacts. So these new burial practices are much more environmentally healthy than prior burial practices. And so we find it questionable to say that we're reducing human life to mere material when the way they're choosing to get buried after their death is actually the most environmentally conscious way that, many people know that's widely available. And so for those reasons, we don't think it risks reducing human life to mere material. So then, to turn back to the first part of the question, which is expressing proper moral respect for persons, while this second part is true, we think that if someone, for instance, wants to be buried in a casket, that it would be objectionable to go against their wishes again under that duty of fidelity and the duty of justice and fairness considerations. And so for those reasons, we think that we should simply intend to respect the wishes of the dead and bury them, as much essentially in the way that they would prefer to. And so that leads to, I think, some interesting questions about the harm of certain burial methods. And so while burial practices that turn humans into remains like soil are better, they're only marginally better than some of the more environmentally conscious ways of burying out right now. However, we do want to be clear that for less environmentally conscious methods, such as cremation, while we would want to respect their wishes in the interim, we think in the long term, we should be teaching people about which burial methods are the most and least impactful environmentally, so then people are spurred to try and practice the new ones. But for instance, if someone has a religious reason to want to be cremated or buried in a casket, we really don't want to disrespect that, again, under those principles of fidelity and justice. We just think that if we made people, or if we gave people the ability to make an informed decision, then they would turn towards this new practice that benefits the earth more than these other practices. And so given that, we just want to reiterate that we think that there is nothing inherently wrong with these new burial practices. They don't risk reducing human life to mere material, but that's dependent on the consent and the wishes of those who are about to pass, which we think we should respect, given those values that we've cited. However, we just want to respect people's wishes when it comes to their burial. So now I'll turn it over to Lydia for some alternative viewpoints.
Yes, thank you, Bernardo. So basically, the main alternative viewpoint here is, you're assuming that somebody's life has been turned into mere material, and why might you think that? Firstly, kind of using a utilitarian framework is once people are deceased, essentially their what is done to their body isn't going to super directly affect those who are still alive. However, some people might disagree with such notion by saying oh, I might be uncomfortable with somebody else choosing to put their remains into soil. And again, we were saying people have the right to express the wish with how they would like to be buried. And then additionally, we would also like to say, in order to kind of calm those people's fears, we need to make sure that there's certain signage or certain laws that kind of dictate where you might want to place human remains. For example, we already have a very vast network of cemeteries in the United States and in the world, and so essentially people can choose to simply not go there if it necessarily disturbs them or something like that. Anything else, Shioli? Excuse me, sorry.
Yeah, so thank you very much to the other team. And so something we'll directly address is maybe a really radical utilitarian viewpoint, which is why ever allow any burial practice that isn't the one that, minimizes environmental harms the most. And as we said, we just want to reiterate that we think fidelity and justice are really important values that we have to consider in this case. And we think that in some cases that making a marginally less good, or one that isn't
Environmentally conscious.
yeah, environmentally conscious, or creating as much utility as possible, that this can be overridden by the fidelity and justice concerns that we have outlined. So just to conclude, to directly answer the question, we said that the new burial practices that turn human remains into soil do express proper moral respect for persons if that is how they wish to be buried. And then, however, we don't think that they risk reducing human life to mere material. However, we do want to establish that fidelity and justice are the concerns, and that if someone does not want to be buried in this way, we don't think that's morally objectionable either. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. That is time. Judges, please mark your scores for Team B's presentation. Team A, you'll now have up to 2 minutes to confer. As before, both teams can take notes and communicate in your breakout rooms, which we will open now. Welcome back, everyone. Team A, you'll now have up to 5 minutes to comment on Team B's presentation. As before, anyone can speak one at a time, and I'll indicate in the chat when you have 1 minute remaining. You may begin.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. It gave us a lot to think about. We think it was fantastic, and we just have a few clarifications. Over the course of this, I will talk about, does morality change over time and how that might affect, our ideas of fidelity? What about, places where, utilitarianism and this fidelity come into conflict? We'll also talk about, how does utility work with religion? What is the value of promises? And a few other things. So I will get started off by, I think these two sort of frameworks, one of, we shouldn't cause harm, we should try to, make the world better, but also we should respect fidelity. There might be some, in this case, maybe they seem like it's pretty clear which one wins, but there might be some cases where it's less clear. So one example is an organ donor. We have the right to decide right now, at least, legally, if we want our organs to be donated after death. But it seems like, deciding not to donate your organs has a pretty big negative consequence. Someone could die because you didn't give them their organs. And so should we respect fidelity to that extent, where someone, as an immediate consequence, isn't going to live? You also made this really interesting argument about, giving people the ability to make an informed decision. But I have a couple questions, though, that I'd really love to talk about what informed decision means when we don't have knowledge of the future. So for example, people who've died long in the past, they didn't really know environmental concerns would be a thing. They don't know about space shortages coming into account later. Maybe if they did know those things, if they were informed of the future, they make a different decision. So how do we reconcile that? And then to pass it along.
Wonderful. Thank you, Signy, for that wonderful thought experiment about the organ donation. And I think I wanted to touch on this notion of promises a little bit more. You talk about the importance of fidelity and keeping your promises. I guess my question sort of is who are you keeping the promise to? Because once I'm dead, it's a little bit unclear who the subject of that promise is. Does my memory have some kind of normative value as something you hold promise to? How does that implicate things like reputation or libel or even discussing history? Because now that I'm no longer a rational agent, it's not totally clear to me the criterion upon which the importance of my promises is labeled upon. And I think that importance of how important are my memories comes specifically into relevance when you conflict it with your other notion about non-malevolence in this organ donor's case. But I'll kick it over to Ari.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm really interested in the specific idea of the moral status of the dead and our meaning to respect their wishes. I think this idea of respecting the wishes of the dead is especially important with regard to religion, where the possibility of infinite negative utils might occur if someone is sent to hell because of them having an improper burial practice, and therefore it's very important to honor their wishes in that regard. However, what about the case where there's a bad religion that causes harm to people here on earth? Do we always have to prioritize the wishes of the dead because of the possibility of those infinite negative utils? This is just something that I was grappling with, and Ari can add on to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it came up in a few discussions. We're really curious to get more perspectives on it. I'll give you even a more concrete example. Catholics can't be cremated. According to their religion, they'll go to hell if that happens. Is it sort of a social duty to ban cremation then? Because Catholicism has a lot going for it in terms of the truth of a religion. There are a lot of really well-attested historical miracles that sort of accord with the Catholic faith. And so it seems like our probability should be a little bit more than zero, a little bit more than zero. And if you multiply that by the awfulness of hell, all of a sudden you get some very weird conclusions popping up. So I wonder, like, especially, in terms of your pluralistic framework, what happens when I throw an infinity into the works? Do you have thoughts on this? And then I also just want to like add on my own little sort of twist on the idea. Like, can dead people really have rights? And it's going to derive from this Bentham quote again, right? The question is can they suffer? And it's hard for me to see how we can sort of afford rights or afford moral relevance to something which doesn't have the experience of suffering.
Thank you so much, Ari. And I just want to add that you seem to emphasize over and over again that fidelity should take precedence over utility and that people should be able to choose where they are buried. I would like to pose this question. What if a person, let's say they receive chemotherapy over the course of their lifetime, mass amounts of chemotherapy, and now they would like to be reduced to sort of mere material. However, this material is radioactive. What if they want to be buried near a water source? And if we multiply this on a mass scale, what if many people have this belief? Many people who have had chemotherapy have this belief, and now we have a very contaminated water source, and we have other people potentially developing other diseases that are causal with radioactive substance. So, in summary, we talked a lot about the balance between fidelity and utility and this idea of pluralism. And we want to thank the opponents for offering very interesting points. And we had a bunch of fun discussing it. And thank you again.
All right, we beat the timer that time. Thank you. Judges, please record your scores for Team A's commentary. Team B, you'll now have up to 2 minutes to confer, and as before, both teams can communicate in their breakout rooms before beginning your response. I'll open those now. All right, all, welcome back. Team B, you'll now have up to 5 minutes to respond to Team A's commentary. As before, anyone can speak one at a time, and I will give you the reminders when they are relevant. I'll begin when you do.
Hi, thank you so much, Yale, for your insightful comments. We really appreciated how you provided some counterexamples that teased at the intuitions that kind of motivated our argument and aligned with it. The first thing that I'm going to do is address the question about organ donation. We think that organ donation is kind of unique, in the sense that you have to opt into it. We think that something that's acknowledged as so uncontroversially environmentally conscious, like this new form of like human remains disposal, we should treat it something like that, such that like the default is that you will be human composted, and various people who have like religious concerns and such should be able to like opt out of the system in a way that our current system of organ donation does not work. So that's kind of how that would look in practice, we think, in a way that align with our case.
Yeah, thanks, Shioli. So yeah, just like how we think the decision to donate organs should be more of an opt-out system than an opt-in, that's sort of how we envision these new burial practices that promise to be more environmentally sound. So now I'll talk about who are you keeping the promise to? And we thought really that was one of the most important questions you guys asked in your response, because it's really important. And we think that in some ways it's uncertain, like you guys mentioned, people have different religious beliefs. We don't really know, in a certain sense what happens after we die. And so we don't really know if there's someone there to keep the promise to or not. But we think either way, we have these intuitive pluralistic duties to fidelity and to justice, to at least have some level of respect for the dead. And we think that our answer to this burial practices question practices a certain level of respect for the dead that we think is within practical reason. And so we think that, for instance, something like libel, like you guys brought up towards the dead, is something that, like you guys mentioned in your last case, we don't want to set bad precedents. And if you're libeling the people who are dead just because you think they don't have value, we think that that doesn't set, very good practice, libel, damaging reputations, treating the memories of people bad after death. We don't think that sets a good precedent beyond the values of, fidelity. And we think that's unjust. So you guys mentioned some very interesting questions about theology. And so that ties into this discussion we're having about dead people and rights. And, it seems that if a God exists, then dead people have rights in some interesting way. So you guys mentioned about Catholicism and how people can't be cremated and maybe a possible ban. Well, we think that it would be quite morally unjust to force people necessarily to be Catholic. Even in the Bible, there's much language about how Jesus converts people, not through force, but rather through kindness and compassion. And we'd like to practice kindness and compassion in this case when it comes to that one specific idea. And again, we want to respect the wishes of Catholics who do not want to be cremated. That's what we're seeking to do in this case. We're seeking to maintain a level of respect. And so that's why we think we should prioritize religion. But you guys mentioned, what about a bad religion of sorts? And while we don't know necessarily what this looks like or how to identify it, we think that if maybe burying someone with respect to their religious wishes requires something that would, like, for instance, damage the earth with respect to their religion, well, then like intentionally damage the earth to a significant, effect or something, maybe that's just one of these types of edge cases where the fidelity and justice concerns can be override by, non-maleficence, because the harm that you're committing to the earth is so large that in that case, we have to consider essentially one person's rights versus the rights of many others. And very strongly so. So then one last point that I'll address is this idea of hell, religion, and infinite negative utils. So while we appreciate that, we don't want to necessarily apply utilitarianism directly to our case. And we think that respecting religion and the religious is a matter of respect to them because, again, they have that belief, for instance, that there might be negative utils coming. And so we want to respect their wishes onto themselves.
Yeah, thank you, Bernardo. So another thing that we want to address is, you mentioned, for example, if somebody had a lot of chemotherapy in their life and then thus they have a lot of radioactive material, how would that play out once they are passed away? So we want to say that as the current state, companies that turn human remains into soil at the moment already have certain precedents about making sure that people with possible contaminants do not contaminate things. So like these companies are already there's already certain legal frameworks to make sure that they are still treating the environment properly. And then again, as Bernardo was saying, we also can see that in certain edge cases, if somebody had cancer during their life, fidelity sometimes can go lower than non-maleficence and harm necessarily. And then a couple other things about, like, as we were saying, so yes, we would definitely agree with you that there's not any ethicality of having somebody contaminate a water supply, and then talking more about the laws behind that. And then thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Judges, if you would, please note your score for Team B's response and just flash me a thumbs up when you're ready to go for the Q&A. All right, thanks, Dave. We will now have the final 10-minute question and answer session for the judges and Team B. Judges, you can ask questions in any order you see fit, and I'll let you know when you have 2 minutes left in the Q&A with William and Mary. So I'll begin when you begin, and your order and timing are up to you.
Marco, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, thank you, William and Mary. I have a question about the moral value of the human body. So a lot of the case has been about respecting the wishes of someone who was once living, but how might you respond to someone who suggests that maybe in addition to considering that, we also need to consider that the human body has some kind of moral worth in itself, and that should maybe factor into our thinking about what should be done or how it should be treated.
Yeah, we really do appreciate that that articulation of this point, that something about the human life and the human body has like intrinsic worth. We think that like this sort of idea that we would agree with our case in practice kind of looks like the opt-out system, opt-in out, opt-out system that we talked about earlier, such that maybe there's a way that the body could go out that best aligns.
Yeah, like as Shioli was mentioning, we think that there's a way for maybe, human remains can have some intrinsic value, and making the world a better place can have some intrinsic value too. So when we talk about these burial practices that turn human remains into soil, there is something materially positive that's coming about due to these burial practices. And so we think that in that case, we can both respect the human body by giving people autonomy, to choose how it goes after death. But, we want to make it clear that if you choose to go out a certain way, that is a certain respect for your own human body and a certain autonomy and control that, again, the duties of fidelity and justice would cover, the reason why we should respect them even after the dead. We have this intuitive view that the human body is something valuable too.
Yeah, and another quick thing to add is like kind of expanding on this nature that human remains do have some distinct value, is that there is no difference in, for example, cremation or turning human remains to soil or actual burial in terms of how you can then revere the dead afterwards. Like, for example, you can still choose to have like a burial marker that, either marks a specific spot that was significant to you or somebody who was recently deceased. And like, we still have like all these opportunities for like both mourning, both celebrating the lives of the deceased. And this can continue even if the physical remains of a human have gone into the soil. This can still continue for generations on, similar to historical burial practices.
If I may just quickly follow up. So is there ever a circumstance that you envision that the wishes of a formerly living person conflict somehow with the value of the human body, that in some way it is disrespecting the corpse?
We think that we agree with this notion about like intrinsic value to the human body. We think that this actually reflects a lot about what the other team said about human rationality. we think that if somebody makes the determination and explicit wish to go out a certain way, then perhaps the judgment made by the rationality takes precedence over the specific way that their body goes out. Yeah.
All right. So you have a general attitude of deference towards the wishes of the departed and trying to respect them and, fidelity to the promises made to them or to their wishes. I want to ask if there's a limit to that. We've got some reasonable wishes in the case study, environmentalism. We talked about religious wishes. What about somebody who wants to be stuffed so that they can hang around the mansion and terrify their grandkids? Or somebody who wants their bones to be called into diamonds because it's the best way of wasting energy and bring about the end of human civilization or something. What is there a limit to the wishes to which we should stay faithful, or do people have genuinely free reign to decide what should happen with their remains?
Thank you. That's a great question, and it really kind of lends itself to our pluralistic framework. The reason we decided to go with a pluralistic framework rather than a strictly deontological one or utilitarian one was because we wanted to account for these types of edge cases like the ones you brought up, where perhaps the harm brought about by the way a body is treated after death is so strong that it overrides our duties to fidelity and justice. In this case, for instance, in terrorizing the grandchildren or wasting such immense resources, you're essentially talking about the rights of multiple others versus the rights of this person in a very serious way. So pluralism allows us to address this case because those rights, become more important within the context you mentioned.
I think, what's a follow-up to that, which maybe not traditional, but what about cases where it's not like so extreme, like the diamond case, but it's like, a parent expresses this wish that their child carries their ashes to a place that's like far away and difficult to get to. And it's like, it's not that it's like it's going to take all these resources. It's like emotionally, it's an emotional toll on the person. They don't really want to do it, but it sounds like your position would say, sorry, you kind of promised, right? Like that you need to show respect for this. Like that's not like one of these cases where it's like this huge resource imbalance or something like that. What do you say about cases like that? Like couldn't we say to those people, like, you don't need to worry about that, they're gone, right? Like what about that? That feels like what we'd say. So how do you think about that?
I would say that based on our framework and such, we would hope that with in an abstractly ideal world, those kinds of conversations would kind of occur before somebody's death, and kind of like our legal processes and our ethical processes, kind of like they should revolve around speaking about the complicated topic of death both before and after the actual event.
But given in situations where it does end up like that, we want to establish that the emotion and feelings that people have are real, and those are significant harms that one might incur. And so perhaps it is the case that the way someone wishes to be buried, would bring about severe emotional harm to the person doing the burying. We would suggest first that if it's feasible, maybe to find someone else to carry out the action or the type of type of burying. And perhaps if that's not feasible, then maybe in some cases it is true that the harm one would bring upon to oneself would override the duty to fidelity in such situations. Obviously, such things are very contextual. And so, we don't know for each specific example, but we certainly think it's plausible that in some examples, it could bring about so much emotional stress and harm for someone to do something that if they can't find someone else to do it, maybe, not respecting the wishes of the dead is, morally positive, morally permissible thing to do.
Can I ask just a clarifying question about your view? Because I think we're going back and forth between two different things. One, sometimes you're talking about fidelity to the wishes of the dead. Sometimes you put it in terms of promise keeping. And those strike me as potentially different. So it's one thing if someone expresses a wish to me and I promise to uphold it. It's another thing if, like, after they die, I find out that there was this desire and now I have a duty to sort of like fulfill that desire. So which were you particularly focused on, or how do you think about those two different cases?
Thank you so much. Yeah, so that's why we wanted to establish that there were two real considerations, and we're sorry for using fidelity so much in these responses and commentary, but there's also this idea of justice, right? And so when it comes to promise keeping, especially when you find something out after, we still think that there's some moral reason, even if it might be outweighed by other types of moral reasons under a pluralistic framework. There's some moral reason to, to act kindly and to treat people fairly and as you would wish to be treated. And so if you have a family member who you maybe never promised to, bury a certain way, but you find out after their death that they, would wish to be buried in this type of way, we think there's also this value of fairness and justice in the case that, would at least give you a reason, before maybe other reasons could outweigh it or not, but it would at least give you a reason. And so that's how we would like to distinguish those two things.
At the very least, I think we have an obligation to fulfill explicitly made promises. And I think I do agree with you that fidelity is a little bit more complex in its application. But thanks for the question.
Can I ask a super quick one? Because we've got 1 minute left. Let's just say it's established that composting is by far the best thing for the environment. Let's just stipulate that. In that world, are you more comfortable with an opt-in or an opt-out version for people who haven't specified their wills? Do you think we should just compost everyone unless they opt out, like they do with organ donation in some countries, or we should only compost people who've actively opted in, and why?
No, I absolutely think that in such a world, we would benefit from an opt-out system under many frameworks, not just the one that we've used in our case. I think the bar for disrespecting religion and disrespecting promises in the way that we've talked about would be much lower in this, and people would have to specifically, I guess, explain. Yeah, people have to be like very aware about their reasons for opting out, and so yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, judges, for the final time this evening, please score Team B's responses to your questions and review your scoring forms before submitting. If you wish, you can take a moment to leave any written feedback you might have for either team. And once submitted, please leave your confirmation screen open so that you can announce your scores. I'll give you just a moment. And while you're doing that, I have a couple of other quick announcements and words of thanks to make, because I love the whole thing where you keep in suspense for just another minute or two while you're finishing up. So thank you all for a very remarkable day. You've shown us, I think, what Ethics Bowl is truly about, which is kind of hard to do in a Zoom call. Not just the sort of competitive thing, but I think genuine community, which again, in Zoom land is very tough. We've seen lots of care, curiosity, and respect for competitors today, and I really appreciate that. I think it's quite inspiring. At this point, before I turn things back over to our judges, I am proud to announce our qualifiers for the 2026 API IEB National Championship. Before I turn things over, this in a regional, which, as you know, comes apart, has both teams seeking to qualify for nationals and teams not seeking to qualify for nationals. These things weirdly come apart in a way that makes the end of the day a little bit anticlimactic. So we'll announce this, and then we'll announce our regional grand champion, which may or may not overlap, but we'll see. So our first qualifier, we earned 2 bids this year based on our size at 18 teams from 18 separate schools, which is a first for us. We've never had a full roster of completely separate schools. Sometimes we have duplicate teams. So our first qualifier will, perhaps unsurprisingly given their presence in this room, be Yale University. And our second qualifier, though they are not in this room, is a living testament to the idea that the minutia of ethics bowls sometimes matter quite a bit, because between our 2 other eligible qualifiers, there was, at the end of the day, after a long cumulative competition process, a single point differential. And that second qualifier is the University of Pennsylvania. So now for the second of the moments that you've all been waiting for, and the result of the current match. I'll turn things back over to our judges to announce the results of our championship. So, judges, in whatever order you see fit, please proceed.
I unmuted first, So I'm going to go first. So I scored this round Yale 42, College of William and Mary 43. So I just edged it. William and Mary got my vote. Well done, both teams. You did great.
My scores were Yale University 44, William and Mary 42. So Yale University got my vote.
Well, this is a nail biter. Thanks, Marco, for setting that up. Jeff, no pressure, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to congratulate both teams. So I had this as an incredibly close match, a very difficult one to judge. But the rules say we can't end in a tie. So I had it very close with Yale University at 47, College of William and Mary at 48. So my vote goes to the College of William and Mary.
Well, I suppose that makes you all authoritative by the power invested in me by your comments just now. There we have it. Our 2025 grand champion for IEBOnline is the College of William and Mary. Well done. Thank you, judges. And just a brief word of thanks for all before we close out for the evening. To our students, this is really hard work. Thank you for doing it, for preparing for it. You're wrestling with different questions. You listen to each other pretty generously, and you model what good reasoning looks like. This is no small thing. You should be incredibly proud of your accomplishments. To our coaches who may still be watching, thank you for nurturing these skills and for the countless hours you've invested in helping your students prepare for the day. The things that you're doing in ethics education world will likely create some ripples beyond this little Zoom call. To our judges here and who are still tuned in with us and our other volunteers, this event simply does not happen without you. So we very much appreciate your expertise, your commitment to fairness, and your value for fostering real, meaningful conversations. We're very grateful for your time and your care. As we close things down for the evening, I hope you'll take forward not just the scores or the awards, but some of the conversations and connections, and a short reminder that engaging seriously with big questions together is one of the more valuable things that we can spend our time on now past 7 p.m., Lionel, on a Saturday doing. So congratulations to all of our teams, and especially to those who will be advancing to our national championship in St. Louis. We can't see what you'll do next. But other than that, thank you very much. We are so grateful for you making this such a special day, and we hope to see you again roughly a year from now when we do all of this again. So with that, wish you all good night and thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Congrats. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a great